Today it will be me and Michael that will conduct this webinar, and the subject is see how Absolent uses Beacon Tower as a B2B portal. Absolent is a company that works with air purifying, and the typical sources are metalworking, die casting, cold forming, and welding machines, which generate oil, mist, oil, smoke, and dusts. And Absolent's products then cleans the air from these contaminants. And Absolent needed a modern and flexible IoT platform so that they could achieve advanced condition monitoring with real-time notifications. Also, they would like to have a flexible B2B portal for their customers, and also a data platform that could be a foundation for future AI projects. And in order to achieve that, we used Beacon Tower as a starting point, and we migrated data and other stuff from their previous platform, and we onboarded around 50 customers and around 200 products. And we haven't counted the gateways, but there are quite a few gateways as well that connect to the products on site. And we also used Beacon Tower as a sort of white labeling IoT platform, which is internally in Absolent called the A-Smart platform. And we also had a lot of custom requirements that we should adhere to, and we chose to build into Beacon Tower in the process. So that is also something that is quite unique about Beacon Tower. That is that if we during a project can see that the requirements from a certain customer is of general interest, it is actually a possibility that we go together and co-build these features together with our customer.
So what we'll do today is we'll look at pretty much how to set Beacon Tower up, and we'll use one of our like key cases, which is Absolent, as Jacob mentioned, to show how they configure Beacon Tower for their needs. But as Absolent is also pretty much matches our customer category called connected products very precisely, which are products that are sold to B2B customers, and usually are also industry products of some sort, also of a size that makes them viable to connect without too much added cost on top of it. It's a very clear case on where we usually see most of our customers. And we'll do quite a quick run through all the different parts of how Beacon Tower is usually set up. We'll focus a bit more on what we call portals, which is our way of making Beacon, in an easy way and dynamic way, making Beacon Tower your data available to your customers through Beacon Tower. And we'll talk a bit more about that. That is a new feature where Absolent was our first customer that started to use it. But we'll start from the beginning, which also talks a bit about the process of getting up and running in Beacon Tower and the way that Absolent did this. So I'm just going to share my screen here, and we will start here. So we are in. We'll show you a bit data from different environments, a bit from the actual Absolent environment of data that we. This is real devices, but the demo devices, and we'll also show a bit from our demo environment where that makes more sense. And we start talking about what you usually start doing when you start using Beacon Tower, regardless pretty much if you do a migration from another platform or if you start from a non-connected device that you do want to connect. And the first part is usual that you need to build connectivity to the Azure IT Hub. You don't have to use the Azure IT Hub. We can take data from pretty much any source, but that's usually the easiest one, and you make use of the IoT hub, I mean the Microsoft Azure IoT Hub, which is quite a well-known and stable device management solution. And once you have your device connected to the hub, the next part you do is that you create a model of that device in Beacon Tower. And what that model does is pretty much just describe your device. So what data comes in from it, what commands does it have, what properties does it have, and so on. And if we look at an example here, this is one of Absolent's product models. You see there's quite a lot of different telemetry coming in, which is just like time series data coming in at different intervals. Then we have properties, and we have two types of properties. We have normal properties, which means it's properties that are available on the device, that either you can choose are writable, so you can configure the device by them, or they are only reported, so you can only see what the device reports. And then we have what we call metadata properties, and these are properties also, but they are not available on the device. So this is data that you want to store on the device that the device isn't aware of itself. It could be like here a serial number, and but also like location and things that the device isn't aware of that you still want stored on the device itself. And this is also configured at a model level. And then you also have commands. There's no commands in these devices, but commands are pretty much like just things that you can execute on the method you can execute on the device. So this is usually where you start. You create a model that, and you should, of course, ensure that you get data into that, and that model shows all the data on the device. And the next step there is often that if you're going to make Beacon Tower available to your customers, the next step there is to start thinking about, okay, what of this data should my customer see? Because there's usually a lot of diagnostic data that maybe isn't relevant for them, or they don't need to see, or it's being too cluttersome if they see all of it. And the way that you can do it in a couple of different ways, but the way we usually recommend is that you create two different models. One admin model for you, with all the data, and then you create one customer model with a limited set of data. And if we look as an example here for admin model and a customer model in Absolent case, they both, so to the left we have the admin model, and to the right we have a customer model. They both contain quite a lot of data, but there are differences. There are a couple of things that telemetry values that doesn't exist in the customer model. And if we, for example, then go down on and look at the properties, the difference here is that there are no properties for the customer that's writables. So you can choose that either some of them are writable or that none are writable, and then you can, on the admin model, you can have them writable instead. You can sure choose this per property on how you like to set it up. And the thing with these two models is that the model acts as a template, and then you create asset instances of that model. So if you have 50 or 100 or 1,000 similar products, you use the same model to instantiate all those asset instances. And in this case, we would have two assets, one based on the customer model and one based on the admin model. And both of those would be connected to the same device. So both of those would get the same data, but they would show, one would not get all the telemetry, for example, and only show the ones you set up in that model. So that's usually the recommended way of having less data shown to a customer. That's step one. The next part usually you come to when you see, because you know what data you want to show, and of course also you can add on this data as you go. You can create a new version of a model and you can migrate devices to that, and that can contain more telemetry values, either because you add more through a firmware update or through that there are existing values that you want to add on. And the next step when you have all the data, usually you start looking at how you want to display it to a customer. And then we come to dashboarding. And we'll look at one of Absolent's dashboards here. Actually, we first want to just cover a bit of the Absolent device setup. So this is a basic example, but we have a gateway here. As we can see here, the gateway only contains some basic information on how many devices are connected to it, connection status, and yeah, a few other numbers. So gateways are a common way of connecting devices. You don't need them, but they are sometimes easier that you have one device that manages internet connectivity, and then you have other devices at for example, a factory floor that connects to that gateway. In this case specifically, the gateway sends data in to Beacon Tower as separate devices. So when Beacon Tower gets the data from the gateway, it already sees it as different devices. Another way to do it is that, for example, the gateway might just have all the data and send it as one device. You get one gateway with 1,000 values. And in that case, you can also in Beacon Tower break that down into separate devices. So you can get 1,000 telemetry values on a gateway, and then you can separate that into specific assets, like 10 different assets or whatever is the case. And so this gateway then sends data for the devices under it, and we can, if we look at one of those, this is a representation of some of the telemetry values on that device. And when we're talking about dashboarding, that's so we use quite a standard drag and drop way of configuring dashboards where you choose your type of dashboard. Here we see dial dashboards, we have chart dashboards, and we have just a list of telemetry values dashboard down here. There are also other ones showing alarms and other types of panels. And this is also usually where we do customization to customers. So if you want a very specific way of showing your device, maybe things that actually move, like you have an elevator that moves between floors and you want to show that, this is where we prefer to do that customization, because a panel can easily be made available only to one customer. But it's also a good example of, like Jacob mentioned, code development, because Absolent did have some specific cases here, which they had in their previous system that we wanted to keep in Beacon Tower. But that was seen as functionality valuable also to have like part of the default Beacon Tower solution. So we implemented that into the existing panels, as you see here. And the way this is configured, just an example, we have different dials showing the key values here. Here we have a dial showing 2 different warning levels, and that will go back to those a bit because they also come back to alarms later. So this is a warning level, a first notification level, you can say, and a warning level, 2 different levels of where you should look at, in this case, a pressure drop for a specific filter. And then we also have the historic data for I think months back in time for this filter. And this is usually where you spend quite a lot of time when setting up dashboards, when configuring this, because of course you want to get the way of representing your data for your customers to write, because that's actually where you may have some value of it. Before we go into the actually configuring this for your customers, we'll also just, as we just talked about these levels, we also just want to touch a bit of on alarms and notifications. So the way this is, let's do like that. So for in the Absolent case, what we did is that there's a range of alarms configured, which pretty much are just, so we can say alarms are usually set up in 2 different ways in machinery. Either is just a telemetry value that comes in, and then you have a threshold value. So like if this is above 200, then alarm should trigger. Or you instead have the alarm already calculated in the machine, and it only sends, for example, a 0 or 1 value. So if it's 1, you trigger the alarm, and if it's 0, there's no alarm triggered. Both ways work fine. It probably just depends on how what flexibility you have in your firmware, and if you do want to manage the alarm there or not. And so these for all the different, so these are the alarms set up in Absolent's environment, and you usually only, it depends a bit on how complex your behavior of your devices are. Usually you only require one alarm for one type of alarm, because you can use the same alarm for all your devices, at least all your devices of one type. The reason you see multiple versions of some of them here is because they are meant for different types of models of devices. You might have more of an issue, for example, when you start having specific alarms for specific devices in specific environments. So you have different threshold values depending on where they are at and what customer they are. You can still handle it because you set up an alarm, but then you would have one alarm per device, or at least maybe for some of your properties. And what happens with alarms is that you get a notification in Beacon Tower when they trigger. And we can actually go over to our demo environment here, just to have a look at that, how that looks. So let's just see how the alarms would normally look. Let's all assets here. Very basically, these are just alarms coming in as a few different example alarms. This is one way of getting them. You see them in Beacon Tower. You can have them on like your starting dashboard. When you go into Beacon Tower, you can see the existing alarms. But you also, of course, can get them as notifications, which is also a functionality that we developed as part of Absolent's going live. So you either get notifications as emails or as SMS alerts, and you can of course choose any combination of these if you just get them in Beacon Tower, or if you also get them as notifications somehow. So that's that. So we also have notifications, as you see here, which are just different notifications going out to either SMS or email. So with that, that's like the basic setup of how we get the data in. We set up the dashboards, we set up alarms and so on, and we have that. So the next part, which is maybe the more complex part of this, but also one of our strengths, is setting up your customer portals or organizations. And before I dive into that, I'll actually do that through a bit of just show you how that works in a PowerPoint to explain it a bit more before we look at it in Beacon Tower. So the idea, what we always see is that some of our customers only have one level, so they only see the data for themselves. They don't want to show it to customers, at least not yet. Then it's a basic setup, of course. But most of our customers do want to show data to their customers somehow. Sometimes all of them, sometimes just some specific ones that have more requirements. But usually there are always some customers involved in this. And in a lot of cases, we also see that we don't only have two levels of this. It's not only that you want to show it to your customers, but it might also be that you have, for example, a distributor that needs to see their customers below them, or you have other complex setups where you want to do have it set up in different ways. For example, in the Absolent case, they had sales offices around the world where some of those sales offices were quite autonomous and should only manage their own customers. And the way we do this is with what we call the portals organizations capability, and it pretty much allows us to you create an area or organization where you which has a couple of users that can access it, and then within that area you can decide what that organization is allowed to do, which I'll show you, but you can also then link resources into that organization. So you can say that this organization can see these assets and it can see these dashboards and it can see these alarms and so on. So you can decide exactly what they can see, and that is then one of your customers. And in the most basic case, which you usually start with, is that you have a basic customer that pretty much can't do anything other than view an asset. And what you do is that you create your asset, usually through you have a provisioning setup where you maybe have that the asset is already created during production of it. And then once it's sent out to customer, then you'll link it to that customer in Beacon Tower. And then that's the only thing they can do. They can see the asset, the data you have chosen that they can see. But then you might have bigger customers that have a lot of products, for example. Like, I mean, some maybe have one, some maybe have 20, 30, 50, depending on the setup. And those customers might have more requirements. For example, one is that they maybe have a lot of users. So it might be an idea that they can manage their own users. You don't have to do it for them. It can be that they want to do their own dashboards. It might be that they want to set their own alarms and so on. And by then giving that specific organization here more access, then you can allow them to do that. And then we have example, for example, of a service partner, a distributor that maybe have even more access. For example, you can have a distributor that have a full access of even creating their own customers without your having to be involved in that. So one distributor can create their customers. They can even be allowed to then maybe create new assets and also then share them with those customers. And that can be done completely without your involvement if you want that. And even as we have some cases, it can also be done actually without you having access to these organizations. For example, if you have a contract, you can use this setup to mimic your contracts pretty much. So if you shouldn't know what customers a distributor has, then you can decide that you shouldn't see this information, but you should still get the data from the assets. For example, there's a full flexibility in here in configuring this how you want it to be. And if you go into Beacon Tower, just visualize a bit these different types. We'll go back here, and we can start on. Let's take a basic one here. So this is one organization. This is an example of a basic organization. And here we have, so the thing we have here, we have the permissions that this organization has. So here we have a basic organization. We've said they can do their own tree structure, which is just hierarchical trees where you structure and place your assets for easier management. We allow them to do that, which is yeah, a basic easy choice to do. But then maybe we have an advanced customer that we do want them to manage their own users because they do want to do that, and we don't want to do it for them. We have also given them tree access, and we also give them dashboard management so they can do their own dashboards. And here also alarm management because they might want more alarms than what we currently have set up for them. This doesn't mean that they can change if you have default alarms or default dashboards. It doesn't mean they can change those because there's always an owner to a resource. So if you create a dashboard and you share that with this customer, it means that if you don't give them permission to manage that, they can only view it. But giving them dashboard management here means that they can create their own dashboards, not editing the ones that you have shared with them. And it's the same for alarms. You might have default alarms that are always available, but then they can set up their own ones. And of course, that's a choice. You could give them edit access, but that's usually not what you want to do in a case where you share one dashboard with many customers. Then we have an example of a service partner. And this service partner here, we have given more access. They can also do asset management, which means they can create new assets and edit assets. Still only means that they can edit assets that they have created, but they can set up new assets. They also have organization management, which means they can create new organizations below them in the hierarchy, and these are the organizations they then control. They can never, though, create an organization with more access than they have. So, for example, here you see we haven't given them model access, and that means that they can't edit or create new models, which is usually only always like the top level that does that, for the reason of that's where you have your product development. But for example, you might want to have a separate organization for your product development and like research and development area, because you don't want to, it might be secret, but it also just might be that you don't want to put that into your like production data with real devices. And then you can choose that there is a separate organization with the ones with the developers, and those also have model management, so they can create their own models. But in this case, we don't want that, which also means that they can't create any organization which has model management below them. So this is setting up the permissions on what they can do, what resources can they create, pretty much. The next part is what resources do we share with them, because you can allow them to create them here, but it doesn't mean they have access to any existing resources. So if we have, for example, our basic customer here, usually what we do then is that we share a couple of resources with them for them to see basic data. For example, if we're in an asset, we see that this customer here has 2 assets that they have a viewer relationship with, which means they can't edit it. And then we also we didn't share a dashboard, but let's see, we have a couple of users set up here. We haven't shared a model with them. Let's see what else we probably have. Yeah, we have a tree shared with them. So a couple of different assets shared with them for them to have like the basic necessary access to view a resource. And if we looked at the same for one of the more advanced customers, I would guess they didn't have more data there. But that's the basic idea, that you have resources that you share with them. You choose what kind of access they have. Do they only view them, or can they manage them? And of course, usually you choose that they can only view them, because that's usually what customers do. But it might be different if you have service partners or sales offices and so on. So this is pretty much what you do. There is a lot of thought that goes into this. The system is very flexible, meaning that so far we haven't seen a case where we can't really adapt to a setup that the customer wants, but there's usually a lot of thought initially to go into how do we want to configure this. How do we want to manage our customers? How do we, for example, want to manage if we have offices around the world, how do we want to manage those? Do they all exist in one big organization, or do we separate them? It's of course good to think that through in the beginning before, because it might take some work to set up. The other part that I want to touch a bit about, which we also worked set up together with Absolent, is the provisioning that I talked a little bit about. And that is usually when you come into a real production environment where you have a lot of devices you put in, you also want to have the provisioning process, meaning putting, connecting a virtual device in the cloud with the physical device. You want to do that during the production process, and you can do that in a lot of different ways depending on how your production is set up. The way I can explain how we did it with Absolent, and what they do is that they make use of our APIs, which are like everything we do here is available through APIs also. So they make use of that in their production process, or at a certain stage in the production process. They use the APIs to create an asset in Beacon Tower. They give it the same ID, which is also an ID that all then exists in the device at that stage. They get a connection string back from Beacon Tower, which contains a key for both for making sure that it's the right asset and device that connects, but also making sure that the connection is encrypted. And they put that back in the device, and that means that as soon as the device then connects to the internet, it knows where to connect, and it has the right key, meaning that as soon as you connect, it starts feeding data into Beacon Tower. So you can have the device ready in Beacon Tower while you and then once you start connecting, you will see data coming in. This can be set up in a lot of different ways, and it's usually a discussion there before you set it up and running on what's the best way of doing this. The last part I want to touch a bit on is one that we haven't fully it's fully implemented, but it's not in use by Absolent yet, but something that we'll expect we'll use more in the future, and that is different ways of getting data out of Beacon Tower. We have a policy which is pretty much that we have no limitations on providing you access to the system or providing you access to your own data. So even if you have a software as a service solution, one of our SaaS options, you always have access to all our APIs. So the same APIs that we use to, for example, from our UI to get data from the system, those same APIs you have available to yourself. If you have an iPaaS solution, you have slightly more access because then you can access databases directly, but that's just other ways of doing it. You always have access to all the data. And this means that one is easy to integrate to because you can integrate any, I mean, if you have developers yourself or you work with a partner for a specific system, you can always have them integrate directly to Beacon Tower. There are more ways than these, but these are the ways that we usually talk about getting data out of Beacon Tower. And they are usually used in different cases depending on what you need data for, but also on what kind of capability that you have. Do you have your own developers or your own existing system? Maybe there is your system can't be developed or changed, so we have to adapt to that system instead. There are different ways of doing that. But the main ways we're working with is, one is our APIs, of course, and you can get through our APIs, you can get all the data out, which doesn't mean only telemetry data, but you can also get our model data, user, trees, permission, organization data out of the system, which means that you can use this data in other areas if you want to have like Beacon Tower as your master data for certain data. But if you talk about the specific telemetry data, you can use the data API to get data out, and that's usually when you need specific data at a specific time. So there's an external application that can request data when it needs it. The second part is something that we are developing right now that will come be available in a month or so, and that is what we call data platform. It's an open source solution that we implement in Beacon Tower because what it does is that it's a way of extracting data out of Beacon Tower in a controlled way and making it available to other systems to consume in different ways. And the reason for that is that Beacon Tower, as that's an IoT platform, it focuses on telemetry data, and it has databases focused on storing time series and telemetry data. And those aren't that efficient to work with if you're going to they are meant to have gigabytes or terabytes of data that's maybe accessed in specific ways. So this is to make data available in other formats that make sense in other ways. One way is, for example, for machine learning models or AIs, where we take out data like either batch data during night and making this available, or you do for reporting generators like Power BI. We pull out the data at certain intervals and making it available in a structure that makes more sense for those models. There are more in this platform which will have a lot of new functionality coming. You can also do algorithms, so you can, for example, transform data. You can have take data from 100 assets, and then you can aggregate that and for example, then use that for a report or things like that. So a lot of functionality will come from this, but we have it specifically to provide all of this data instead of trying to build that directly into the platform, which will be much more efficient. And the third way, which is just maybe mostly interesting if you do want to have data pushed to another system. For example, whenever we get data in from one device, you want that sent out from Beacon Tower to something consuming that directly. So if you want something that can react very quickly to data coming in. We use this, for example, in a few cases to take data into SCADA systems. So we get data into Beacon Tower, and then we send it to a SCADA system directly when it comes into Beacon Tower. These are the three ways that we usually recommend using. It doesn't mean that you can't get data out in other ways, or we can build connectors to other systems if they can't integrate to one of these ways. But they're usually the ones that are most efficient to get up and running. So with that, I think we have actually covered most, and I think that's as much time we wanted to spend on presenting this.